Hey, my fellow listeners. We know you guys love these creepy stories, yet most of you aren't subscribing. Please hit that sub button and join the family. Hit the bell icon so you never miss another video. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. It started with a classified ad I found buried deep on a job board I wasn't even supposed to have access to. Something a friend of a friend linked me when I mentioned I was desperate for work. The kind of thing you click on at 2 in the morning with a resigned sigh, expecting nothing. The title was just a string of numbers and letters, DPT 77, and the description was a wall of gray text that promised a unique administrative opportunity for individuals with a high tolerance for ambiguity and a disregard for conventional career paths. It sounded like corporate nonsense, the kind of job where you shred paper all day, but the salary number next to it was anything but nonsense. It was a life-changing number. I applied with a cynical laugh, never thinking I'd hear back. A week later, a plain manila envelope arrived with no return address, containing a single sheet of paper with a time, a date, and an address that didn't seem to exist on any map. Curiosity and that stupidly large salary figure pushed me to go. The building was exactly as nondescript as you'd imagine. A concrete cube tucked between a laundromat and a permanently closed bakery in a part of town the city seemed to have forgotten. The inside was all fluorescent lights and beige walls, the air smelling of stale coffee and ozone. The interview wasn't an interview at all. A man who introduced himself as Mr. Evans, a person so average he was almost invisible, slid a binder across the table. It was thick, black, and cold to the touch. "Read the first 10 pages, he said. "If you can agree to the terms, the job is yours." The first page was a single sentence. "You are not to discuss the nature of your work, the location of your work, or the identity of your colleagues with anyone, ever." The second page was a list of disavowal clauses that made my head spin. The third page began the rules. They were strange, I'll give them that. Rule 1. The lights in the main office are to be maintained at exactly 42% luminosity. Not 41, not 43. A digital dimmer is provided. You will check it hourly. Rule 2. All coffee must be consumed black. The introduction of sugar, milk, or any other sweetener or creamer into the office environment is strictly forbidden. Rule 3. You will take your lunch break at precisely 12:17 p.m., not 12:15 or 12:20. You will leave the building for the duration of your break. You will return at 1:03 p.m. You are not to be late. It went on like that, a list of petty, nonsensical directives. Some were easy, some were just annoying. I figured it was some kind of psychological experiment or a test of my ability to follow orders. I thought about the money. I signed the last page. Mr. Evans gave me a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes and handed me a keycard. "Welcome to the Department of Ontological Anomalies," he said. "Your training begins now." The first month was a blur of monotony and unease. My job, as it turned out, was to process incident reports. They came in on old-fashioned dot matrix printers that chattered to life at random intervals, spooling out long strips of paper filled with accounts that read like bad fiction. Most were nonsense, clearly the work of cranks and conspiracy theorists. A man in Nebraska claimed his shadow had detached itself and was now giving him financial advice. A woman in Oregon reported that all the reflections in her house were from a different, darker version of her home. We were to log them, categorize them using a Byzantine system of codes, and then, in almost every case, file them away in the cavernous archives in the basement. The rules, however, were the real work. They were appended to constantly, new memos appearing on my desk each morning, typed on that same heavy, cold paper. Rule 14. If you hear the sound of a child humming the tune to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star from the air vents, you are to put on the provided sound-canceling headphones and play the attached audio file of white noise until the humming stops. Do not investigate the source. Rule 22. The photocopier will sometimes produce copies of documents you did not place on the glass. These copies will often depict rooms you do not recognize or text in languages you cannot identify. You are to collect these copies immediately and feed them into the cross-cut shredder located in room 4 bits. Do not read them. Do not attempt to translate them. Rule 31. On the last Thursday of every month, the water from the cooler in the hallway will taste like static electricity and faintly of copper. This is normal. You are required to drink 1 8-ounce cup. Refusal is grounds for termination. I followed them all. I was a model employee. I adjusted the lights, I drank my black coffee, I ate my lunch at 12:17 on the dot, and I drank the metallic water when the time came. It was just a job. A very weird, very well-paying job. The strangeness became routine. That was the first mistake, thinking it was routine. The change happened slowly, a gradual corrosion of my perception. I started noticing things out of the corner of my eye, fleeting movements that vanished when I turned my head. The office, which was always quiet, began to feel like it was holding its breath in the moments between the printer's clatter. The air grew heavier, sometimes so thick it was hard to draw a full breath. The other employees, a handful of silent, pale individuals who never made eye contact, seemed to feel it too. We never spoke, but I saw the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands sometimes trembled when they reached for a new stack of reports. One Tuesday, a new rule was waiting for me, taped to my monitor. Rule 49. Should you arrive at your workstation and find a small ceramic owl figurine sitting on your keyboard, you are to immediately vacate the office for the day. Do not retrieve your belongings. Do not speak to anyone. Go directly home, draw your blinds, and remain indoors until sunrise the next day. Do not answer the door or the phone. The owl is not a prank. I laughed when I read it. A ceramic owl? It seemed so absurd, even for this place. But 3 days later, I arrived, keyed in the entry code, and walked to my desk. There it was. A small, painted ceramic owl about the size of a coffee mug, with wide, glossy blue eyes. It was perched directly on the spacebar of my keyboard. My laughter died in my throat. The air around my desk was cold, a good 20 degrees colder than the rest of the office. A deep, instinctual fear, the kind you inherit from ancestors who were afraid of the dark, clenched in my gut. I didn't hesitate. I turned around and walked right back out, my heart hammering against my ribs. I drove home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I drew every blind, locked every door, and sat in the middle of my living room floor, listening. The phone rang once, a shrill sound that made me jump. I didn't answer it. A few hours after sunset, I heard a soft tapping at my front door. It wasn't a knock, more like something small and hard gently rapping against the wood. Tap, tap, tap. It went on for what felt like an hour. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Eventually, it stopped. When I returned to work the next morning, the owl was gone. The air at my desk was back to normal. No one mentioned my absence. It was as if nothing had happened. That was the day the job stopped being just a job. That was the day I understood that the rules weren't arbitrary. They were a cage, and we were the keepers, but we were also the ones inside it. The reports I processed started to look different. I began to see patterns, connections between seemingly unrelated events. A series of missing persons cases from a small town in Ohio all mentioned a tall man with a wide smile seen in the area beforehand. A cluster of industrial accidents in Germany all occurred in facilities that had recently reported strange, localized gravitational fluctuations. We weren't just logging crank calls. We were monitoring the frayed edges of reality, places where the fabric of what was real was wearing thin. The rules were the protocols to keep those frayed edges from unraveling completely. The next major incident involved Rule 61. Rule 61. Under no circumstances are you to acknowledge the man in the beige coat if you see him in the archives. Do not speak to him, do not make eye contact, and do not accept any documents he may offer you. If he attempts to hand you something, close your eyes and count backwards from 100 until you can no longer feel his presence. I had to go down to the archives to retrieve a cold case file. The archives were a nightmare, a sprawling multi-level labyrinth of shelves that stretched up into darkness, lit only by flickering bulbs in wire cages. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. I was on sub-level 3, looking for aisle 7 grams, when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the aisle, his back to me. He was wearing a beige coat, impeccably clean despite the grime of the archives. As if sensing me, he began to turn. I quickly looked down at my clipboard, my blood turning to ice. I could hear his footsteps, soft and measured, coming toward me. I kept my eyes glued to the paper, pretending to read the same line over and over. He stopped next to me. I could feel a cold radiating from him, a deep, soul-sucking chill. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his hand extend. In it was a single sheet of paper, crisp and white, an offer. My mind screamed Rule 61. I squeezed my eyes shut. 100, 99, 98. I started counting backwards in my head, the numbers of frantic prayer. I could feel him standing there, a silent, patient statue of cold. The presence was immense, a pressure on my mind. 87, 86, 85, the cold intensified. I felt a faint, insistent tugging at the edges of my consciousness, a whisper that promised answers, that promised knowledge of what lurked in the dark corners of the world. All I had to do was take the paper. 52, 51, 50. The whisper grew more persuasive. It knew my name. It knew my doubts. It promised to show me what happened to my grandfather, who disappeared when I was a child. 33, 32, 31. The temptation was a physical ache. I was so close to knowing. But I remembered the rules. They were my anchor. I clung to them. 20, 19, 18. The cold began to recede. The pressure lifted. The whispering faded to a faint echo and then to nothing. I kept counting until I reached 0. Then I counted to 100 again for good measure. When I finally, cautiously, opened my eyes, the aisle was empty. The only sound was the hum of the distant fluorescent lights. It was the silence that followed Leo's disappearance that truly hollowed me out, a silence so profound and absolute it felt like a physical entity had sucked all the sound from the world. The soft, rhythmic clatter of the dot matrix printers, the faint hum of the lights at their mandated 42%, the nearly inaudible rustle of paper as my colleagues processed their own nightmares. It all just stopped for one long, impossible minute. It was a collective holding of breath, a moment of shared, unspoken acknowledgement that a line had been crossed, a boundary had been breached, and the consequences had been immediate and absolute. No one looked at the small pile of fabric that had been Liu's smart casual office wear. No one glanced at the spreading puddle of sweet milky coffee. We were all statues, frozen in our roles, pretending with every fiber of our being that we had seen nothing, that the sudden absence of a human being was just another part of the daily grind. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the sounds returned. The printers started up again with a jarring burst of noise. The hum of the lights resumed. I saw the woman 2 desks over, a pale woman named Janice, who I had never heard speak, slowly pick up her pen and continue filling out a form, her hand steady as a rock. That was more frightening than the event itself, the seamless return to normalcy. It demonstrated a level of conditioning, of acceptance, that I now knew was required for survival here. I was still staring at the empty space when the cleaning crew arrived. They were always just there when you needed them, materializing from the shadowy corners of the office like ghosts in gray coveralls. They never spoke, their faces were always placid and empty of expression. They moved with an unnerving, synchronized efficiency. One of them produced a gray plastic bag from a pouch on his belt, and with a practiced flick of his wrist, it opened. The other used a small, rubber-tipped grabber tool to collect Leo's clothes, not touching them with his bare hands. The sweater, the trousers, the socks, the underwear, all of it was deposited into the bag with a series of soft, rustling sounds. There was no body to collect, just the shell he had left behind. The second cleaner had a mop and a bucket on wheels filled with a clear, pungent liquid that smelled like antiseptic and ozone. He mopped up the latte spill, the white whipped cream dissolving into the brown liquid before being sopped up and wrung out into the bucket. Within 90 seconds, the floor was spotless, gleaming under the dim lights. They turned and walked away, their soft-soled shoes making no noise on the linoleum. The entire operation was so clean, so clinical, it was as if they had done it 1,000 times before. And for all I knew, they had. That was the moment the last vestige of my old life, the person I was before I walked into this concrete box, finally crumbled to dust. The fear I had felt with the owl, the chilling dread of the man in the beige coat, those were external threats. This was different. This was the system itself, the very machinery I was a part of, enacting its cold, impersonal justice. Leo wasn't murdered by a monster. He was erased by a principle, a fundamental law of this twisted reality we inhabited, for the crime of adding sugar to his coffee. The memo that appeared on my desk that evening felt like an epitaph carved in stone. Rule 89. The words were final, a judgment passed. Compliance is not optional. It is survival. They weren't just words on paper anymore. They were a stark, brutal truth. I went home, but I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch in the dark, the city's ambient light casting long, distorted shadows across my living room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again in perfect, horrifying detail. The way Liu's smile had first widened with the pleasure of the sweet drink, then how it had stiffened, becoming a rictus grin of terror. The way his eyes had lost their focus on me and locked onto something behind me. Something vast and hungry and utterly wrong. And then the folding. It wasn't a collapse of bones and muscle. It was like watching a glitch in reality. His body lost its dimensions, its volume, its physical truth. It concertinaed in on a point I couldn't see, the sound of it not a crunch of bone, but a soft, wet rustle, like a silk sheet being crumpled in a giant's fist. 1 second, he was a 3-dimensional person. The next, he was a 2-dimensional sketch, and then he was just gone. The heap of clothes settling to the floor was the period at the end of the sentence. I thought about stopping, about just not going back. But the money was already in my account, more than I had ever earned, and it came with a whole different set of unspoken rules about loyalty and silence. Where would I go? What would I do? Tell people I quit my government job because an intern was folded into nothingness for drinking a latte. They would lock me away. Or worse, someone from the department would pay me a visit. The man in the beige coat, perhaps, this time not offering a paper but taking something from me. The department didn't feel like a job you could just resign from. It felt like a blood pact, a lifetime commitment. You were in or you were out. And being out, I was starting to understand, likely meant being gone, one way or another. So I went back the next day. The office was exactly the same. The same stale air, the same dim lights, the same silent, pale faces. Liu's desk was already occupied by a new person. A middle-aged man with a tired look in his eyes who didn't ask any questions. It was as if Leo had never been, his existence scrubbed from the record of the world with the same efficiency as the cleaners had scrubbed the floor. I walked to my desk. I placed my hands on the cool surface of the laminate. I looked at the digital dimmer readout. 42%. I had brought a thermos of black coffee from home. I unscrewed the lid and took a bitter, unsugared sip. It tasted like ash and resignation. I opened the first report of the day from the chattering printer. It was from a night watchman at a museum in London, claiming the statues in the Egyptian wing were trading places when no one was looking, and that one of them, a cat goddess, had winked at him. A month ago, I would have snorted and filed it under crank. Now, I read it with a grim focus, looking for the underlying pattern, the telltale sign of a fray in reality's fabric. I was no longer just an administrator. I was a sentry on the wall. The work took on a new, grim significance. Every rule I followed was no longer just a pointless order. It was a ritual, a ward, a necessary piece of a grand and terrible spell designed to keep the darkness at bay. When I checked the light levels, I wasn't just obeying a directive. I was maintaining a precise frequency of illumination that, for reasons I would never understand, was somehow less appealing to the things that lurked in the periphery. When I drank the metallic water on the last Thursday of the month, I wasn't just swallowing something foul. I was inoculating myself, or perhaps marking myself as part of the herd, a tag animal that the predators were instructed to avoid. The fear never left me. It became a part of my metabolism, a low-grade constant adrenaline buzz that was just below the threshold of panic. I started seeing the subtle signs in my colleagues I had missed before. The way Janice would sometimes trace a specific, complex pattern on her desk with her finger before opening a new file, a personal warning, perhaps. The way the man across from me would always tap his pen 3 times on his temple after using the photocopier, as if to clear his head of any residual images. We were all practicing our own little superstitions, reinforcing the official rules with our own private rituals. We were a priesthood of the damned, tending to an altar whose true purpose we could never comprehend, only obey. The truth I had stumbled upon was both simpler and more horrifying than any conspiracy theory. It wasn't about control or power. It was about containment. The government, or at least this fractured, hidden part of it, wasn't the villain. It was the janitor, desperately trying to clean up spills of unreality before they stained the whole world. And we, the employees, were the custodians. We were the ones who swept up the psychic debris, who patched the holes in the fence, who followed the strange rules because the rules were the only map we had through a territory that actively sought to erase us. The most terrifying part, the thought that keeps me up at night even now, isn't the memory of Leo's folding or the chilling presence of the man in the beige coat. It's the slow, insidious normalization of it all. The human mind is remarkably adaptable. It can get used to anything, even existential horror. The fear becomes a background hum. The absurd becomes your daily routine. You joke about it in a hollow, breathless way that isn't really a joke at all. You find yourself thinking, well, at least it wasn't the owl this week. That acclamation is the real trap. It means you're losing your grip on what real normal is. You're becoming a creature of the department, suited to its twilight world, and one day you might look in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back, a person for whom the folding of a human being is just a minor workplace incident. So I go to work. I adjust the lights. I drink the black coffee. I take my lunch at 12:17. I follow the rules. I do my part to hold the line. And I try, with every ounce of my being, not to think about what happens if the rules, one day, are not enough.